Greetings of peace and welcome to each one of you. Our program today is hosted by the Brahma Kumaris of Dallas. And later on, after I've introduced our guest speaker and our moderator for the program, I would like to ask Sister Ranjan, our center coordinator, to welcome our special ladies today. Our first introduction is of Sister Maureen. Sister Maureen, her full name, I'm sorry, is Maureen Goodman. She's the program director for the Brahma Kumaris in UK and the Brahma Kumaris representative in the United Nations in Vienna. Over the past 40 years, Maureen has served on several committees promoting interreligious dialogue. She currently represents the Brahma Kumaris on the Elijah Board of Religious Leaders and joined members of the board on a visit to Ukraine in April to give messages of care and comfort, freedom, hope, as part of the Faith in Ukraine initiative. She's also an ambassador for the Living Peace projects, focusing on education and healthy water. Maureen has a deep interest in exploring the spiritual and ethical dimensions of climate change and the nature and harmony and connection between our inner state of being and the state of our earth. And recently co-facilitated dialogues at the COP26 in Glasgow on the themes of shifting paradigms for a sustainable future and leadership for a loving world. Maureen is on the executive circle of the Spirit of Humanity Forum. Hosted by the city of Reykjavik, the forum creates a safe space for self-exploration and dialogue among leaders to discover new ways to move forward based on deep human values. In the UK, Maureen has worked with a variety of community groups, developing the university's outreach work in prisons, healthcare, education, youth, and women's issue and interfaith dialogue. About 30 years ago, I was very privileged and fortunate to greet and meet Sister Maureen here in Dallas when she attended an interfaith conference. Her warm smile and her sweet demeanor charmed my entire family. So I'm so happy to have this opportunity to introduce her. And now let me introduce you to another wonderful personality. Our moderator is Philippa Blackmon of the UK, who is a journalist and a radio presenter, having worked for the BBC Radio for quite some time. She's now the coordinator of the national project entitled 100 Women of Spirit, which recognizes the spiritual contribution to society made by women. She's an ordained interfaith minister and has studied Raj Yoga meditation with the Brahma Kumaris for almost 40 years. For those of us who have followed this Purity series, you're well aware of her expertise in asking just the right questions and engaging all of us into the depths of this current topic. And so, sweet welcome to both of you, but I would like to officially ask Sister Ranjan to greet you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sitaben, and very, very warm welcome to both angels from UK and Sister Maureen. I remember my early days in London, and we've been together, I think, some years for interfaith meetings, and we went together. But apart from that, we've been meeting in the class every day, and we were so close. And then until I came to Dallas, you know, it was good connection. But now I just pop in and then say hello to everyone and then come back to Dallas. So yeah, all memories are so fresh. And I really am so happy to welcome you to Dallas online, but definitely in future, both of you, we would like you to come to Dallas as the situation changes. So we are very happy to have both of you, Sister Philippa, as usual. We are so eager to meet you every month, and we always are more and more excited to hear your questions and the answers from all the speakers. So very, very warm, hearty welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning here and your afternoon.
Thank you so much, Ranjan Ben and Sister Sita, for those very beautiful introductions. Maureen, it sounds like you're well at home in the Dallas BK family, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you too to the lovely introductions and the warmth, the feeling of warmth. And yes, it must be 30 years ago, but you know, when there's a connection of the heart, then time and distance
Yes.
don't mean much, do they? And Ranjan we've been good friends for a long time, and that's absolutely continued. Thank you so much.
Well, one of the specialities of the Dallas family is that it is such a family feeling, and you really do feel like you become part of their family when we are fortunate enough to join them for one of these occasions. And as you know, it's probably getting up for a year now that we have been deeply journeying with this topic of purity. And we've looked at it from every angle: purity of our mind, purity of our thoughts, our attitude, consciousness. But in a way, today's topic brings all of those things together, because where is the proof of having achieved that degree of purity? Surely it shows up in the mirror of our relationships, because we can think we've achieved something, but it's not until we come into relationship with others that we get to find out exactly how far we have come on that journey of purifying our consciousness and purifying ourselves. So would you agree that in some senses this topic of purity of relationships is so crucial, because in a way that is the crucible within which we are creating a pure world, because we're bringing it into action through our relationships?
Yes, I agree completely. And if you think about it as you go through life, it's relationships that have the greatest impact on you. It's relationships that are the most meaningful for you, for us, for any one of us. Our life is governed by relationships, actually, whether it's a relationship with the self, with God, with others. But relationships are crucial because the proof of my inner state is in how I interact in my relationships and how successful or not my relationships are.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to talk in quite some detail about those one-to-one relationships, but it felt important to me that we begin our discussion by looking at our primary relationship, if you can put it like that, and that is our relationship with ourselves. Because this is where we begin on our spiritual journey with the question, who am I? And before we come into relationship with others, we have to first learn the right way of being in relationship to ourselves. So how do we bring purity into that relationship of the relationship I have with myself?
Well, you're right. The relationship with myself is crucial. It's the starting point. And if I'm honest in my relationship with myself, I'll be honest in my relationship with others and with every aspect of life. If I am not honest with myself, then I'll be living a life of deceit, actually. And I will always be trying to catch up with that or make up for that. For example, you know, if I'm really honest about what it is I can do and what it is I can't do, then I focus on what I can do. I do that well, and that becomes my expertise. And there's a purity in that, and part of purity is focus. And then people understand me as I am. I'm very clear. If I'm trying to be something other than who I really am, trying to do things which are not comfortable for me, I mean, we all have to come out of our comfort zone. But if I'm not honest about what I can do, what I can't do, I'm trying to project an image that is not me. And so it's very important to be yourself. And I think it's important to identify with our eternal selves in relationship with ourselves. So I can identify with all my roles, that's one thing. And then I play the roles, but if I get too trapped in them, I then try to be something or to someone rather than being myself. But identifying with my eternal self is identifying with my natural inner qualities that bring me ease, that bring me comfort. And then in my relationship with others too, then my conscience is clear because I am being myself. I'm being open, I am being true to myself. I am being clear, I am being honest. So
now you've been on the journey with many souls over 45, nearly 50 years that you've been on this path. And I wonder what you've observed in terms of how people's relationships change when they do begin this journey of self-inquiry. Because it seems to me that there's an extent to which what we see in others is actually a reflection of what we have in ourselves. So if we see someone as a beautiful soul, what we're seeing is our own inner beauty reflected in that soul. If what we're seeing is the defects, the faults, the irritations, what we're actually seeing is those things in ourselves that actually annoy us, and therefore they trigger us, and that's why we notice it. So to what extent is our relationship with someone else based on actually ourselves and not them?
Well, you know, I was thinking about this because I had a situation just the other day when I felt a bit uncomfortable about something and I said something, and then actually I couldn't sleep hardly because I wasn't uncomfortable about the situation, but I was uncomfortable that I let myself down from my highest principles. And I thought, well, you know, it's up to me to live by those highest principles. And if somebody is being negative towards me or in whatever way it is, then if I react or respond in the same way, then definitely it's just the mirror effect, and I'm no different. So I always feel it's important to do something more elevated in a negative situation rather than just responding in the same way that somebody's responding to you. But the fact that they've responded to you in that way in the first place, I agree with you, it means there's something that has triggered that. So there's something, maybe a trace of that in you, and actually you react because you don't want to see it, which I think you said. You know, if someone says to you, actually it's quite interesting, there's a threshold, isn't there? You know, one is when you know you have a defect and you know you feel bad about it. Another is when you have a defect, you try to hide it. Another is when you have a defect and you don't even know it. And I remember working with someone years ago, and they were a very angry person, very angry. And once, eventually I said to them, you know, you do get angry sometimes. And the response was, I don't get angry, I don't get angry. And so there was anger in the response, but total denial of themselves. And I thought, oh, you know, it would just help you so much to just say, yeah, I get angry, you know, because then once you accept that in yourself, you can start to work and you can start to transform. So I know myself, when I really react to something, that's the thing I have to transform in me, you know. And when, but I hope, or I try to keep at that level where I react a little bit inside, but I immediately want to put it right because I can recognize that mirror effect. And I say, well, do I want to stay there? Or do I want to go somewhere else? Do I want to improve? Do I want to grow? So I think that's the key, you know, but I do agree. Everything's a reflection of, you know, how we see the world, isn't it? You know, however I see myself, that's how I see the world. And if I'm, say, critical of myself, I'll be critical of people. If I'm loving towards myself, I'll be more loving towards others. It will have that impact.
Do you think we're sometimes, in a way, attracted to people that have the same defects as us, because it makes us feel slightly better about ourselves? But also maybe sometimes we're attracted to people that have the qualities that we don't yet have ourselves. And so somehow by being in relationship with that person, they are carrying that aspect for us. They're plugging the gap in ourselves until maybe we can find it within ourselves. They're helping us draw that out from within by us being in relationship with them.
It's interesting. It's a kind of bit of a dangerous place to be in a sense, in that if I'm with people because in a way they comfort me in my defects, I'm going to be reinforcing my defects. I'm not going to have an incentive to change, and it'll become an excuse. Well, you know, so-and-so gets angry. If I get a little bit angry, what's the big deal, for example?
Or so-and-so likes to gossip, and I like to gossip, so I will join them in gossiping. Yeah.
And because, you know, that person, you know, they're a good person, but they gossip a bit. Well, that's okay, you know, kind of makes it all right. And then the other side of it, if I see somebody has something that I know I need in myself, it's important not to put them on a pedestal in that case. Because once I start to look up to someone in terms of saying, oh, you know, they're wonderful because they have that virtue, and I don't have it, I'm actually suppressing myself. And I think it's very easy to do that. And I know, you know, I think over the years with the practice of meditation and the, you know, work on the self, I've been able to mature a little bit, I hope, like an old cheese, maybe, I don't know. But, you know, I'm more wanting to be whole in myself rather than wanting someone else to fill in the gaps. And I'm understanding more how to be inspired by somebody, but to actually make it their own. Because if I say they've got that virtue, you know, they're very wise and I'm not wise, well, I'm not recognizing it in myself because we all have wisdom. But I'm also keeping that virtue away from me because I'm keeping it with them. And then I'm putting myself down more and more. And so where do I end up? It doesn't help me grow. So and I always, in myself, I always want to learn and grow and move forward because there's happiness in that, you know, but staying just at the same level, you can just get bored with yourself, you know.
I mean, that is interesting because many spiritual paths have a tradition where you go and sit in a hut or a cave for months on end. You know, a lot of the Buddhists have this practice, you know, 3-month solitude and silence. But the Brahma Kumari's path is very much about being around people, being in relationship with others. And we have this idea of being coloured by the company that you keep. And somehow being in that atmosphere has an effect on the soul, and it lifts us up. What would you say for you has been the learning through having to be in relationships, even sometimes relationships that you might not have necessarily sought out in a different parallel life, but you're drawn together because of service or whatever, and you've had to overcome your difficulties? What have relationships taught you, would you say, over these past 45 or so years?
I think, well, first of all, I'm not one to sit in a cave. I would find that very difficult. Even being isolated when I traveled during COVID was very difficult to sit in my room for 2 weeks. So I really like to be with people. But the biggest thing I think relationships have taught me is that ego is not useful to me, and ego causes me a lot of pain. And I think relationships have taught me a lot of humility. As much as I have humility, we're all on the journey, all on the path. It's taught me to respect everyone for who they are, where they're at, to accept them. And it's taught me to be, it's taught me in that sense of having humility. It's taught me that I don't need to prove myself. The minute I feel a little bit insulted, I feel a little bit that I have to prove myself, I feel a little bit defensive, then I feel very uncomfortable inside. And I've come down from my pure state of being who I truly am. And we have those original qualities inside that really is our eternal identity. And I've come down to an ego state, if you like, where I'm trying to impress somebody or project a certain image of who I am onto them, so that they then like me. When we're in a state of purity inside, we don't need to take from anywhere. We give naturally. But when I'm not in that state of purity inside, then I've seen in relationships that then there's that, that ego comes in to protect myself, protect my negative feelings, the defensiveness and everything. And then life becomes very difficult. So I think that relationships have really ground off the rough edges for me of my personality, and really helped me to see what I have to change. And when you're in a difficult situation, of course you can sit there and say, oh, why is this happening? It shouldn't be happening. And, you're trying to control the situation, because if you're asking questions, you want it to be different. But you can't control another person. You can only control yourself. So it's taught me to stop and say, what does this situation have to teach me? What do I have to learn from this person? And that gives a whole other perspective. And that frees me from that internal suffering, frees me from putting myself down. I'm now saying, okay, what can I learn? How can I grow? How can I move forward? And the whole thing seems much better. Plus, I think another thing too is to understand that we've all come with our experiences. We've all come with certain traumas, actually, from, whether it's childhood or what we've absorbed from our parents, so on and so forth. And so if another person is being negative, I don't know what in their background is driving them to behave like that. Because nobody is happy being negative. Nobody is happy being angry. Nobody is happy being jealous. Nobody is happy being in a state of ego where they always want to show that they're up front and they are the best and they're in charge and so on. There's no happiness, no internal happiness in that. So that also teaches me to be compassionate towards people, even the people who are horrible towards you. You know, there is something that's driving them to behave in that way. So,
that's a very lovely idea, because in a way what you're saying is that in each relationship the other person is your teacher, because they're teaching you something about yourself.
absolutely.
And as you're speaking, I'm wondering as well about this challenge that we're all on of overcoming the vices of lust, of anger, of ego, of greed, of attachment. Very often those vices come into play through our relationships. It's by being in relationship that we experience the potential for vices. But also it's through our relationships that we get to practice and demonstrate our qualities and our virtues. We get to practice compassion and kindness and caring and acceptance. So there's both things going on. There's the overcoming of the vices, but there's also the inculcation, the drawing out of divine qualities and virtues. So it's massive learning ground.
It's huge. And to focus more on the positive, on the drawing out, naturally weakens the vices. You know, because if I battle with the vices, anything I battle with in my mind becomes stronger. And so then, you know, I'm saying, you know, I shouldn't have ego, or I shouldn't have done this, or I shouldn't have done that. That thing just gets bigger and bigger, and I just feel worse and worse and worse. Guilt is, you know, I always say, I mean, I do feel guilt at times, but I always say to myself, guilt is useful for maybe 10 seconds, 20 seconds max, so that I identify something's wrong. And then what can I learn and move forward? Or what would be the virtue that would counteract that situation, or that the quality of that interaction? So if I have reacted and tried to prove myself and say, well, you don't recognize me, or you didn't ask me this, or you didn't include me in this. No. What would be the virtue? To be royal, to be humble, to be in my self-respect. And that feels so much more beautiful and natural to the self. I always remember one of our daddies, when elder sisters, when she was here in the UK, and somebody asked her a question in a gathering. Daddy, what would you do if somebody accused you of something in front of a whole group of people? And she stopped and she said, well, if really I'd done something wrong, then I'd apologize. And if I hadn't done anything wrong, I'd just ignore it. And I thought, gosh, there's no ego in that answer, just self-respect. Did something wrong, a duty to acknowledge, to apologize. If I haven't done anything, well, why should I spend my energy on it? Why am I trying to prove the truth? The truth doesn't need to be proved. It's evident. And so if not today, tomorrow, or the next day, the other person will understand that.
I mean, that's such a good example of what we were talking about earlier, that the purer you are in your own being, the less likelihood you're going to have conflict in any relationship, because there's nothing in you to get activated. It's just like water off a duck's back. And I can imagine being in a position of leadership, which you are in London. You are the kind of the visible leader for quite a large group of people, that there must be times when people project their stuff onto you, and you're not being the sort of leader that they want you to be, or you're not doing things in the way that they would want you to do them. And you become, in a way, like a dumping ground for other people's stuff. And I wonder what you do in a situation where you really feel like it's not coming from you, it's coming from them, but you're drawn into a relationship with them because of the role that you're playing. How do you turn that around? I mean, Daddy Janky said, well, just ignore it, but sometimes you can't just ignore it. So what tips have you got for dealing with that kind of projected stuff from someone?
Yes, it all sounds very familiar, what you're describing. And sometimes because people know that you keep a certain standard, like in the sense that they know you're not going to suddenly get angry with them, or, you know, they really want, they feel safe to throw their stuff on you, you know. That's interesting as well. You're a good target. And I remember there was somebody who used to insult me every day in front of people, literally, practically every day. You're not practicing, you're in the class. It was pretty strong. And I just listen and I just say, thank you very much. And it's interesting, and that's quite an extreme situation, but my main priority in that situation was to keep a good atmosphere in the gathering. And I knew that if I got into an argument with this person, you know, like, well, why are you telling me that? Or whatever. What, you know, the whole thing would disintegrate into chaos, you know. And so you know, it's like having a higher goal, a bigger picture, you know, a bigger world view of what is of more benefit to everybody. It's not just about what I need to prove for myself. And so I would keep the atmosphere, just keep the atmosphere, and people would comment on it sometimes. And but this person's just, you know, kept happening, and I was, that we have a saying, you know, red rag to a bull, you know, I somehow really got his ire up. And anyway, I asked Daddy Janky about it at one point, and it was very interesting. I said to her, you know, this happens, and should I be forgiving him? Should I reach out? Should I, what is it? And she would often answer me a little bit in signals. And she said to me, well, if somebody comes in front of me and they insult me, I listen, it's over, they go away, I'm left the same as I was. So that was her signal to me, you know, the fact that I'm still carrying it a little and I'm asking her that question, it's had some impact on me. So then I understood that what I need to do is actually make sure that there is no impact on me. And so that would give the ability for the situation to change. Situation kind of abruptly moved on. So in a way, I didn't see that through in a sense, but it was very interesting because, again, we're talking about everything reflecting to the self. You know, I expected her to give me some tips about how to deal with that person, but instead she wanted to give me a tip about how to deal with myself, knowing that then if I get that right, I'll understand what to do with this individual. So that was interesting. And of course, we come back to our original qualities. They're our anchor always, you know, our inner peace, our love, our purity, our wisdom, our strength, our joy. You know, all our innate qualities are there waiting to be released and expressed. But our negativity, whether towards ourselves or towards others or a situation, serves to suppress those qualities. And something that I always remember in one of our teachings, it was that, you know, what are the roots of violence? And we see a lot of violence in the world today. And the root of violence is the first violence that I do towards myself. And that first violence is to suppress my inner goodness. And that made a lot of sense to me, because when I suppress my inner goodness, then there's a gap inside. So I have to fill it with something. So I want to fill it with gaining approval from someone, being recognized, all the external props. And the more I rely on the external props, the more my inner goodness becomes buried. And then, of course, when I'm relying on the external, you know what happens? Somebody then insults you. You think you've made it because everybody thinks you're a great teacher or a great mother or whatever. And then someone says, "Oh, I think you're rubbish at that." No, it's your whole identity being threatened, and you get defensive, and it can lead to violence, but you can extrapolate it and see that it can lead to war. Because where somebody is so a collective consciousness of a particular identity that is right and needs to be proved, and nobody else should be able to have any other identity than that, and the picture, and any threat, and war ensues, or my resources, they're not your resources. God gave the earth to everybody, and we've owned it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I love what you're saying there about letting go of a situation in your mind so that you're not carrying it beyond that moment. And in that way, you're dispelling it and making that difficulty go away. And, I think what I sometimes do is I have a practice of imagining that soul in their highest perfect form. And I just see what's coming out as just, the rubbish that's coming out. But what I'm holding in my vision is that soul in its perfect form. And, that's how we're transforming the world, by seeing the world in its highest form. And that's how we are being transformed, because the divine is seeing us in our highest form. And we therefore become that because someone is holding that vision of me. And that brings me on to, getting into the crux of purity in relationships, because, we're so familiar with the way in which relationships can bring us into bondage, because people have expectations, they have a sense of ownership over us, they want to control us. And, many of us, let's be honest, our relationships have been about feeling suppressed in one way or another, or not fulfilled. But let's take the concept of being in a relationship with someone to its highest level. What in a perfect world is the purpose of a relationship? What would that look like? How would it feel? How would it feel?
That's a beautiful, beautiful question. I'm thinking here of the prophet, and there's the saying on marriage, and you may know the quote better than me, but something like, you should be like two tall pillars in a temple, each giving support yet strong in their own right. You should be like two tall trees in a forest, for I think the oak and the cypress do not grow in each other's shadow, something like that. Absolutely. And I feel with relationships, especially in our own most intimate relationships, the beauty of true beauty in a relationship is when there really is that total respect and regard for each other, and the growth of one is a joy to the other, and each one wants the other to move forward in the best possible way. So there's no bondage, there's no feeling of obligation, but a feeling of security, a feeling of safety, and a feeling of very pure love. It's love for the other no matter what, acceptance of the other no matter what. And those kind of relationships bring a lot of happiness, actually. So, in the perfect world, imagine people really interacting in that way, and giving to each other. That's the other thing in relationships. If I'm always thinking about what I can give rather than what I can take, again, imagine a world where everybody wants to give. And at the moment, we live in a world where everybody wants to take. whether they take your money or your time, your energy, or they want to take your regard, etc., your approval. I've repeated this, had such a funny scenario on the tube train recently where, you know, people come along and there wasn't very packed or anything, so there was space between people. And so this guy comes along and he puts a packet of tissues and a little note on each seat next to people. So I looked, and of course, you know, it said I'm out of work and can't feed my children, and it says left these tissues. So big softy me, I said, okay. He comes back again. So I said, okay, wait, oh, I wanted to give him £1, you know, so let me pay for the tissues. And before I could, in an instant, he took the £1. In an instant, he took the tissues back and the note. I laughed. I thought, you know, I wanted to catch him and say, well, there's more dignity in me paying you for the tissues than the handout. But he was off because he...
Wonderful.
So this thing of taking, you know, there's no dignity in that, you know, but in giving there's dignity. So I did my bit, but it really
you're right. We become so cynical that, you know, any relationship, you're like, well, what are they trying to get out of me? You know, what do they want? Why are they being nice to me? They must want something. But you know,
I remember once somebody saying to me, they've been coming to the centre about 6 months, pleasant enough. Then after about 6 months, they wanted to talk to me and they said, you know, I think I trust you now. I was so suspicious of you because you kept smiling all the time. I smiled. What to say?
What can you do with that?
What can you do? You know, people are so used to people being negative, you know, like you say, wanting something or being deceptive, that it took a while for them to say, actually, I think she's okay.
But that's what's so lovely about this kind of ideal world where we're not wanting anything from anyone. Nobody's wanting anything from us. And it's about finding that kind of sweet spot between having a sense of a commitment to a relationship, but with complete detachment. So there is love, but there is complete detachment. You're not needing them, but yet there is happiness in being with them. And that's quite a fine line, isn't it, between being committed and yet not being attached.
Yes, yes. And attachment causes sorrow. So it's like when you're with that person, a lot of happiness. And when you're not with them, you're not thinking, oh, I wish I could be with them. I wish I could. Then there's sorrow. That is attachment. That is bondage. And I'm not then able to fully be myself. It's so important to be whole in yourself in relationships. And attachment leads us to do things which are not beneficial for me or the other person. You know, when I start feeling sorry for somebody, I can indulge their negativity to trying to think of an example. Well, somebody was saying something to me just recently that, you know, somebody's not, what they're doing is not right, but because they feel sorry for them, they don't want to say no to them. But ultimately, if you keep propping up someone else's wrong behavior to keep them happy, in the long term, it weakens them even more, and there's more sorrow for them. So sometimes you have to be a little bit strong,
Tough love.
Tough love, if you like, yeah. Or it's even just that you just have to stand firm in what you know is right. That's all, you know.
I'm just going to remind anyone who's with us in this conversation, if you would like to put a question in the chat box, you're more than welcome. We have got time for a question or two. So if you're burning with something that you'd like to contribute or like to say, do please use the chat box. But, you know, Sister Maureen, in a way, we've talked about these relationships in their perfect form. but really perhaps our ultimate experience of purity in a relationship is the relationship that we have with the divine, because we're in a relationship with a perfectly pure soul.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could say a few words about how that is possible, to feel that you are in a relationship with the divine, and if so, what that does for us.
Yeah, it's the most beautiful of relationships, for sure. But for me to be in relationship with the divine, as you said, the purest being, the purest soul, I need to be on a certain wavelength to do that. And so, you know, of course, it's possible as an inner experience in meditation. It's not that I can go somewhere and knock on a door and find God lives here and I could get to know him or her. So I first have to be in my state of soul consciousness. We talk about the inner being, the soul. When I'm in that consciousness, I don't have to be perfect, but I'm practicing that consciousness, experiencing it. I'm experiencing my inner peace, my inner love, my inner purity. Then my consciousness is on a different level to when I'm just thinking about the problems and the people and all the things that I have to do, or more so the things I haven't done. So in that vibration of soul consciousness, it's not actually that difficult to connect. We connect through thought, and thoughts, the quality of thoughts determine the quality of the vibration. So negative thoughts have a very low vibration, angry thoughts, a very low vibration, violent thoughts. And with those thoughts, how can I get to God? But when I'm thinking more about the original qualities of the soul, and I'm thinking on that level, my vibration is different. And so I'm then able to connect. And with a thought, to think about, to just hold, you know, flow of thoughts is one thing, but when I'm connected in meditation or yoga to the divine being, it's like holding a thought of myself as a pure soul and of God as the highest, unlimited pure, unlimitedly pure soul. I hold that thought, and that thought helps me to connect. And when I connect with that supreme highest soul, then there's an unlimited storehouse, vastness of love, of peace, of purity, of knowledge, of joy, of bliss even, that's available when I connect. So that gives me a lot of inner strength. When I connect naturally, those vibrations are then flowing into me. Makes me very, very strong. And so then that helps me to withstand the negativity.
Mm-hmm. I really see how that works. Yeah, because in a way, as the world gets more and more chaotic, this kind of force field that we have around ourselves of purity, of soul consciousness, of being connected to supreme consciousness, this becomes like a little bubble of protection, because people sense that. And any animosity or negativity, in a way, is bounced off before it can even reach you, because you're holding that energy so strongly that they can't get in. And so it actually becomes a beautiful form of being in the world, and yet nothing of the world touching you, which is in a way what it is to be an angel. I'm saying that because you're sat there with these beautiful petals behind you, but they do look a little bit like angels' wings. So I do feel a bit like I'm talking to an angel, but really that is a definition of an angel, to be there, but nothing can touch them.
Yes, but also then to be God's helper.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, at God's right hand, and to be able to partake in the task that God has of renewing this world. That's the task of an angel. And so it's about not thinking about what human beings want, but what does God want? And whatever God wants for the world is going to be the best for the world. When I was, you mentioned the visit to Ukraine, and I was being interviewed by somebody afterwards here in UK, and they asked, you know, well, where is God in this? You know, how can God allow this to happen? And I said, yes, that's a question, but actually the question is, where is humanity in this? What have we done on the earth that's created the conditions for this war to take place? So it's not about what is God doing? It's really about what are we doing? And so there's such a difference between what human beings are doing on the earth and what God wants for the future of humanity. And it's so important to tune into that and bring that energy to the world. The world is desperate for it. Desperate.
Absolutely. And that's maybe a subject for another day, really, is our purity of being in relation to the planet and to nature and the environment, and what that looks like. We have just had one question from a Spanish speaker who's asking, what of the many relationships you have with the divine would you focus on if you wanted to develop more purity in your relationships, especially relationships that are kind of complex? What relationship with the divine would help with that?
I think when I'm, faced with something and I really go to God for help, I think at that moment, in a way, I've not really analysed it as such, because it's just been a question of feelings. But really at that moment, I feel God is my protector, my support, and my guide. So God is there to show me what it is that I need to do, to give me the power to do it, but is there as a protector, so that God is saying to me, and I do feel this, you do this, I'm with you, I'll make sure it's okay. So it's a very beautiful, secure feeling, because in a way, what you've done then is to hand over your problem to God. And I think God can deal with things a lot better than I can, actually. But it's really that very deep feeling that God is there for me, the protector, the guide. What was the first thing I said? The helper? No, something else.
Liberator.
In a way, but especially protector and guide.
Yeah.
Amazing. I've really had that feeling of God guiding me on many, many occasions. It's felt very safe.
And that helps with your other relationships. We are going to go to a meditation in a moment, but we've got another question that has come in. When you're living in a spiritual community, for many people, they assume that if someone is on a spiritual path, they're going to be looking at their own stuff and working on themselves. And so it can sometimes come as a bit of a shock when you're in relationship with someone perhaps who's senior to you, and that relationship is actually bringing you sorrow. Through their behavior, it's bringing you sorrow, and it's almost like a sort of a double disappointment, because they're spiritual, so therefore how can this be happening? Do you have any advice for someone who's in that situation?
It is a difficult situation, definitely. But then I have to understand, just as at that moment, you see, if I think that person's senior to me, then I will be criticizing them. They shouldn't be like this. Why are they like that? At that moment, I just need to think of them on an equal level. And just as I wish people actually I'll repeat something, a golden rule. Every faith has a golden rule, and we thought of the golden rule for us, and it's a direct quote from our teachings. When I don't like others to speak of my weakness, why do I speak of others' weakness? And if I only see their specialities, then goodness will prevail. And so at that moment, not the senior thought, just think of them as a human being, as a soul, as a sister, as a brother, and understand that just as I have my traits that I battle with, they will have the same. They've come with those, and I don't know what they've been through. So that understanding, because even that relationship of thinking somebody's senior to me and they should be like that is a kind of bondage. So I have to be really fully in my self-respect and not put them down or criticize them, but really be a helper and a support to them. And that will change the dynamic in the relationship. And yes, if there's somebody else I can go to speak about things, then let me do that, unburden myself if I'm in a state of sorrow. But I need to, at that moment, see with a different perspective so that I can release myself from that bondage of thinking they should be like this towards me. I can let them go, in effect.
A lot of letting go going on.
Letting go, oh, big subject, yes.
Thank you for that answer. And again, I think we could we could take another whole hour on that. But thank you as well for the question. So we're gonna now go into our meditation. We've talked a lot about how to bring pure consciousness to our relationship with ourselves, to our relationships with others, to our relationships with the divine. And so it would be lovely just if you could lead us into some time of shared silence where we can really feel in our heart that purity of pure relationships.
So first I go inside and experience myself as the pure being. I'm a soul, being of light. The charioteer of the chariot of my senses and my body. I come into that awareness of being the sovereign of the self. And so I choose to be in the consciousness of my original state of purity. And that brings with it peace and love and understanding. And in this state of purity, I go beyond. I hold that thought of the connection between I, the soul, the being, and the Supreme Soul. The light of the soul connects with the light of God. And I experience the vastness of God's peace, purity, and love. I dive deep into the ocean of love. And that pure love fills the soul, gives strength, gives courage, and I naturally overflow with love. Love fills the atmosphere. Peace fills the atmosphere. Purity fills the atmosphere. This enables others to be uplifted into that experience as well. And I know when I return to the awareness of my body and my surroundings, that atmosphere stays with me. That atmosphere comes into all of my relationships, whoever it may be. I can feel that atmosphere of purity. They can feel safe. They can feel uplifted. They can feel that they too can be themselves as they truly are. And so together we create a world of purity.